Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It is Tuesday, March 3rd, and I'm Blair Herbie. A quick intro here today because we've got a lot to get into. Chiefs General Manager Brett Veach addressed reporters on Monday, and I thought he had plenty to say about the team's needs heading into the offseason. Beat writers Herbie, Teope, and Sam McDowell thought so also. We'll hear from them first, then take a break, and then play the entire Veach press conference, which lasts about 30 minutes. So let's get started talking Chiefs. Herbie Teope and Sam McDowell are here, and we're going to talk about the Brett Veach availability on Monday. I thought it was a pretty interesting half-hour talk and Q&A from Brett Veach. First of all, I was thrilled that he mentioned Terez Paylor right off the bat, and this is the first time we've actually had any kind of public comment from a Chiefs front office person or anybody from the Chiefs. We've seen statements, but Brett Veach was the first to comment on it, and he's absolutely right. Terez loved covering the Chiefs, but I think he really enjoyed this part of the season as much as the games themselves, the free agency, the getting ready to run up to the draft. This is Terez's time. Don't you guys think?
Well, absolutely. This is the time that he absolutely enjoyed. And I go back to last week should have been the NFL Scouting Combine. And just from hanging out with him in Indianapolis, this was his time. This was the time to hustle. And to Brett Veach's credit, acknowledging Terez, also pointing out that he knew that Terez loved this time of the year. But it was, again, a nice gesture from the Chiefs to push last week's media availability to this week to honor Terez.
And you'll hear that when we play Brett Veach's comments after we finish talking. You'll hear him open with Terez. Okay, wanted to get your guys' thoughts on what Brett Veach had to say. I thought it was pretty revealing. Basically confirmed speculation that we've all had about where the Chiefs are going to put their focus on the off season. Sam, you kicked it off, went right after the offensive line, and that probably took up 2 or 3 questions today with Brett. What did you think about what he said about the offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Blair. I think that he was more forthcoming than I expected him to be on some of the topics that he was asked about. Obviously no team wants to just publicize their blueprint for the offseason, but he came pretty close with saying that their priorities are going to be the offensive line, the defensive line, and then I think to a lesser extent, but he did mention the linebacker position as well. And he mentioned the offensive line, not just when he was asked about the offensive line, but also on tangents on other questions as well. So you can tell that that's going to be on the Chiefs' mind throughout the offseason. Now, it's interesting, and I know you'll get to at least a piece of this, and so I'll just address it broadly. But, if you can get Eric Fisher back in this season, I don't think that was the guy that we had planned on, at least when we talked last week about the Chiefs' offense. If you can get Mitchell Schwartz back, for week 1 potentially, you've got Lucas Niang probably coming back from opting out last year, same with LDT. They're going to have options to address their offensive line problems in-house, which is why I led off by asking, do you foresee your solutions coming in-house or outside the facility? And he still said, despite what I just listed with those 4 guys, they plan on addressing this with bringing in new talent as well.
Right, either through the draft or free agency. Okay, Herbie, Sam put it out there, the Eric Fisher injury that was so surprising. The answer that we received from Brett Veach was so surprising that Sam Mellinger, later you'll hear in the Q&A, had to follow up just to sort of clear his ears. Did I hear that right? So what did Brett Veach say, and why were we skeptical about it?
Well, because Eric Fisher suffered a ruptured Achilles tendon to his left leg in the AFC Championship game. Typically, when you think of a ruptured Achilles, depending on the individual, it can range anywhere between 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 months before they're back on the field. So, a lot of us who understand that timeline, we're thinking, okay, he probably won't be available for the start of the regular season. However, Brett Veach says, their medical staff are projecting him to be back by mid-August. What in what capacity, that remains to be seen. Is the pup list a likely scenario? Perhaps, but that they're thinking that he might be available by mid-August training camp, and then maybe even the start of the regular season, which would be phenomenal. Because he is their starting left tackle. He's got a lot of things working against him right now, though, because that rehab process, when you do some research on rehabbing from an Achilles injury, the timeline I gave is usually about on average. And then from talking from other players who have gone through that, you're actually looking at a 9 to 10 month process. But again, they seem optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a difference between returning to practice and returning to the field and actually being game ready to play. So I think that's what, the five of us in our little Chiefs chat have sort of deduced, is that this is a good sign, regardless, that they think Eric Fisher could be back on the field in mid-August. But that doesn't mean he's going to be ready to play football in week 1, whenever that's going to be. But I still think this is maybe now a guy that they plan on having at some point, at least during the season. Now, and coming off an Achilles injury and being 30 years old, are you going to be your former self? I think that's another question the Chiefs are going to have to ask themselves this offseason.
Yeah, and their most recent example of that would be Derek Johnson. You remember a couple of years ago, he ruptured his Achilles again, his second one, I believe, in December, and he was available for the start of the season, but he just wasn't himself. Go back to 2014 when he and Mike DeVito ruptured their Achilles tendons in the season opener, and they were available for OTAs, but it still took them a while to get their legs under them. So this is going to be a fascinating one to watch, and as Sam points out, this is good news, but hey, the Chiefs are based in Missouri. Show me.
It just makes you wonder if there are different degrees of Achilles injuries, right? And maybe the Chiefs and Brett, you'll hear it. Brett said he's got the note. He's reading from the note given to him by Rick Burkhalter, the trainer. So that wasn't Brett Veach riffing off the top of his head. That was information from the Chiefs medical staff, from the medical staff. So interesting. I thought another interesting thing that came up today was the position group was wide receiver, and I think we learned a little bit today about who we might see and might not see in the Chiefs uniform next year. What do you think, Herbie? Did you hear it the way I did? That it would be an upset to see Sammy Watkins back next season.
Yeah, and I think the same thing. Veach mentioned during Super Bowl week, they would like to have him back. But I think Watkins is eventually going to price himself out of the market here as far as what the Chiefs can afford. Demarcus Robinson, I would actually be surprised to see him back as well. What Veach said, to piggyback off of what Sam mentioned earlier, offensive line and the cornerback position and linebackers, he mentioned that the wide receiver depth in this draft class, you could find good value in the middle to late rounds. The fact that he tossed that out there leads me to believe that they are taking a hard look at the wide receivers in this draft.
Yeah, I wondered if maybe he was couching their actual interest in wide receivers today, because like I mentioned at the top, I mean, as forthcoming as he was about their other needs, all of us talked last week, wide receivers a need. When they lose Sammy Watkins, they've got to have somebody replace Sammy Watkins. I know he said today that he likes Tyreek Hill, thinks Byron Pringle can take a step forward. They still like McCole Hardman, but I still think they need another guy there and a number 2 guy as well. And there's so many players available via free agency this offseason. And he said, that I don't think you're going to see us in week 1 of free agency go out and get another wide receiver. But I just wonder if one of those guys, if the market comes back to the Chiefs and the Chiefs pounce on that, because it's a position of need, whether or not it's one of their top 3 needs or not. I still think it's a guy the spot they've got to address.
Yeah, you'll hear Brett Veach say the 3 names that he mentions are Tyreek Hill, McCole Hardman, and Byron Pringle. And I've been kind of waiting on the Byron Pringle status elevation for about a year now. I think we're going to see it this season. And Herbie, you also asked him about Tyrann Mathieu. I think that's a player that we're kind of counting on seeing some sort of extension and maybe a way to help the Chiefs with their cap number, shuffle the numbers around a little bit. But bottom line is they want to see Tyrann Mathieu here for a few more years, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I think his exact words were, quote, years to come, end quote. But they have to do something with Matthew and to get any kind of relief. He has a cap number of just over 19 million, I believe it is, in 2021. So extending him now makes perfect sense. He is in the final year of his contract. Last year they placed a priority on Patrick Mahomes as well as Chris Jones, and they're probably entering this phase here before the start of free agency with Matthew at the top of their list. We got to get this deal done so we can at least get some cap relief and we can address some issues that, during free agency with some money to spend.
Okay, Herbie, go ahead, Sam.
Well, I was just going to say that was the one other thing that I took away from Brett Veach today is the cap. He was specifically asked about the cap, and he acknowledged that this is going to be a hurdle they're going to have to deal with throughout the offseason, and that when they go through and decide whether or not they want to add a player via free agency, they're going to look and say, but if we add this guy, do we also have to make 1, 2, or 3 more moves in order to make room for that player? So I know that Chiefs fans are going to want them to add guys. I mean, heck, we saw J.J. Watt today sign with the Cardinals, and that was a guy that a lot of Chiefs fans were interested in. There's going to be guys like that Chiefs fans want to get, and you just got to understand that the Chiefs are dealing with some cap restraints this offseason.
J.J. Watt, 2-6 in his career against the Chiefs. I had to look that up. 0-2 in the playoffs. So, hey, Herbie, take us through the schedule. What's coming up in the next few weeks? What does the NFL calendar tell us about free agency and talent acquisition here?
Yeah, the biggest date to circle right now would be March the 15th. That's going to be the 3-day window for the open negotiation period between agents and teams and players, etc., otherwise known as legal tampering, as most NFL people will say. And then after that, the league's calendar year opens on March the 17th. And so these are the big days that are coming up on the calendar, and these are the days that everyone's going to be. Essentially, Sam and I were not going to get any sleep. Like for the next, once free agency starts, that's the time where we're like, okay, we'll start pulling shift work. Okay, I'll watch this from here until midnight, and then so on. But yeah, that's the busy time is about ready to hit us.
A lot of paying attention to college pro days that are coming up, and of course, we'll be all over the NFL draft in April as well. So. Let's get to Brett Veach. We'll take a break, and when we come back, you will hear Brett Veach in his entirety. Went for about 30 minutes, and the first 2 questions right out of the box from Sam McDowell and Herbie Teope. So, guys, appreciate this conversation, and we'll do it again soon.
Thanks, Blair.
Hey, it's Blair. We have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Star's award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening.
Well, I appreciate you guys for hopping on this Zoom call today. I think, as you guys know, we were supposed to have this call last week, but out of respect for Therese Paylor and his legacy, we thought it'd be appropriate to postpone this call a week. Once again, on behalf of the organization, our deepest condolences go out to his family and his fiancee, Ebony. I know Taylor would have loved being on this call today. This was his time of year, the draft and free agency and putting the roster together. So certainly going to miss him today. Look forward to talking to you guys about the future of the Chiefs. Before I do that, just real quickly on the 2020 season, really proud of the organization from Clark down to Mark. Certainly Andy and his staff and our players. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, the hurdles that we had to overcome just to get the season to the finish line. So everybody in our facility here, the operations people, the facilities people, and Rick and his amazing staff of keeping our players healthy throughout the course of the season was certainly quite a feat. I think after last season and winning the Super Bowl, if you would have said, we would have went 14-2, 8-0 on the road, back-to-back Lamar Hunt trophies, and back-to-back Super Bowl appearances. We'd all been thrilled, but the reality of it is, the expectations were high. So, I'd be lying if I didn't say it was a disappointing ending, and certainly the way the game was played and the way we lost left a sour taste in our mouth. But it's certainly motivating for us and for our staff here, and we're just anxious to get this offseason started and get right back at it, and hopefully we have fans back and things get back to normal as soon as possible. So, again, look forward to the offseason and improving this roster, and hopefully putting our organization in a position to go back to the third straight Super Bowl, which would be quite a feat. So with that, I'll open it up and take your questions.
Go first to Sam McDowell. Go ahead, Sam.
Hey, Brett. Appreciate the words on Therese. Wanted to ask you about the offensive line. When you look at the makeup of your offensive line, do you feel like your solutions are in-house, or do you feel like that's a position you're going to have to address outside of the facility?
Yeah, I certainly think it'll be a combination of both. I mean, look, we, Coach Heck and our staff did an amazing job. I mean, we had 2 opt-outs with LDT and Niang, and we certainly missed those 2 players throughout the course of the season. And we did a lot of shuffling, as you know, and certainly the final blow was losing Fisher in that Bills game, and that was a daunting task to go against that front in the Super Bowl. So, we do like some of the young players and their progress and their development. Andrew Wiley has shown that he can play on a consistent level and at that guard position, and Allegretti took a step forward. We're anxious to get Niang back. So, we have a nice blend of some young players that are continue to get better, and we think we'll continue to improve. But certainly, our focus will be to bring in some new talent, and like the way this draft looks. This draft looks here, or from the offset here, the draft looks to be really talented on the offensive line. So I think it'll be a combination of what we have in house and blending that in with some new talent, potentially in free agency and potentially in the draft. But certainly like the way the draft is shaping up, and I think it's safe to say that we'll be addressing that in any area we can.
Next to Herbie Teope. Go ahead, Herbie.
Hey, Brett, good morning.
Morning, Herbie.
Hey, 2 questions here for you. The first one, last year you entered the offseason with Patrick Mahomes and Chris Jones as your top priorities as far as taking care of them with extensions. How high up the list for this year would you put Tyrann Mathieu, who enters the final year of his contract, as far as extending him? And I'll have another question after that. Yeah,
well, I mean, listen, as you mentioned, with Chris and Patrick last year, you put Tyrann in that category, and we'll have some work to do and to get with him and his agents, but enough can't be said about Tyrann and his importance to this team, both on the field and the locker room. I mean, he's proven to be not just a great player, but a great leader and a great person to have, developing the young guys and out in the community. So, we'll certainly go to work with him and his agents to see what we can get done, but needless to say that we hope that he's a fixture with this organization for time, for years to come.
And lastly, Brett, this is probably the last time we're going to talk to you before the week of the draft, and you aren't likely to talk to us before then. But without the combine, the medicals, the interviews in person, how challenging is this pre-draft process compared to last year when you did have the benefit of the combine to look at medicals, et cetera?
Yeah, it's extremely challenging. So, the medical is something that I know the league has been working on, and I actually had some conference calls with Rick last week, and they're putting together a plan to bring in the players that would have been invited to the combine to get their medicals. It won't be probably as detailed or as exact as we had in the past. That is always, an issue. That was an issue last year when we couldn't bring guys in-house for top 30 visits or go out and work those players out. When we get guys in for top 30 visits, we have the ability to medical those guys. So any players that you didn't get at the combine, you would just invite them to the in-house facility and then do the medical here. So that'll be a huge part of it. Also, the numbers too, I think will be interesting, and we'll have to work through that. So last year, we at least had the combine, and we had the top 100 and so players there, and we had verifieds in regards to height, weight, speed, 40s, vert, broad, all that stuff is verified. And we had basically, one comprehensive sheet. Now, what you'll have this year is you'll have the numbers, there'll be limited access to these pro days. Now, there'll be NFL representation there, but you won't have full access. You'll have to be selective in where you go. And, you guys know how this works. It's always interesting to me when you see 40 times, at the combine, you know what they are. They're run indoors on turf, and the environment is very, it's similar. Now, when you go to these pro days, you'll have, certain players working out in an indoor facility with a faster track under weather controlled conditions. Then you'll have some colleges that, they'll be running in 40 degrees and the wind will be blowing in their face. So when you click on the report, you'll see the numbers, but it's going to take a lot of kind of historical research. There are schools that typically produce faster 40 times. There are, I don't want to name names, right? But I mean, we all know, there's a list of schools that we always say is that 30, did they run at 38 yards there or 39 yards there? Because you'll have a player X go to the combine and run 4.5 and then go to their school and run 4.4 or 4.38. So I think it'll take a lot of work of going back in some of the historical archives and formulating a metric that really stabilizes, all the information that you're getting. So that will be challenging. At least with the combine, you knew the surface and you knew the conditions and everyone was on the level playing surface. So trying to differentiate between which are closer to that time and which aren't will be a challenge. I think we have a little bit of idea how to do that. I think like all teams, that will be a challenge of trying to figure out, are these guys really 4.3 guys or would this have been a 4.45 at the combine? That'll be a little bit challenging. So that will be interesting. But again, all teams will have to face that scenario.
Let's go next to Adam Teicher. Go ahead, Adam.
Hey, good morning, Brett. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Adam. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Hey, I wanted to follow up on Sam McDowell's question. I was just curious about your philosophy about building an offensive line. I know this year was a weird one because you had to dig so deep into the depth on the offensive line. But still, you haven't spent a lot of money other than Mitch Schwartz extension a couple of years ago. You haven't spent a lot of money on the offensive line. And correct me if I'm wrong, Lucas Nyang was your highest draft pick on the offensive line last year since I think it was Mitch Morse. So anyway, just curious about your philosophy on the offensive line and how you've built that and maybe whether that needs to change this year. And Brad, I'll have a second question as well.
Yeah, no, certainly that's a good question. I think, just the general football 101 is get a quarterback and then build through the offense and defensive lines. At the same time, the reality of it is, how the draft flows and, what's available to you. You have to make, certainly good decisions and not overdraft or go in different directions. So when you talk about just, again, that 101 philosophy about once you secure quarterback, you want to build through the offensive lines, I certainly think you can make a case for that on the defensive side and continuing to throw money and resources on the defensive line. I would say that it's the similar priority for the offensive line and probably those windows of opportunities of whether players available in free agency or whether what was available to us at the draft at that time wasn't available. Last year when Lucas was there in the third round, certainly that was a guy that, we made a priority to go get. I would say in years past, whether that be not having a first round pick or not having the lineman that you wanted available, graded as high, available for when you were picking, probably, had something to do with that. But I don't think it's certainly one of those things that you don't ever go into an off season or draft and not have in your mind that one of the priorities is to continually invest in the offense line. And that's probably why, again, when you think about the last few drafts, the players have to be in those ranges. You don't, I guess in your mind, you don't want to draft fifth round lineman in the third round and you want it to be, you want to have that value representative in regards to what round you're picking in. So I would say a lot of it had to do with just maybe where the picks fell in each round, what was available to us in free agency. Again, I think you saw that amount of effort and resources put in the defensive line, but I think in general, your philosophy is always to build up front. And, I'm sure we'll do that this offseason.
Go ahead with your second, Adam.
All right. Also, can you give us some idea of what the expectations are for Mitch Schwartz, Eric Fisher, and Pat regarding when they might be available? What kind of the outlook is for those three guys?
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at my medical notes here. So Pat had his toe surgery on 2/10. Talking to Rick late last week, it's a 3-month recovery. So we're hopeful, somewhere around that mandatory mini camp if we have. We certainly think by training camp he'll be good to go, and we'll be smart with him. Mitch just recently had his disc worked on, and we're hopeful for for him to return to training camp, and the same thing with Fish. So we're hopeful both these guys will, complete the rehab and be available for training camp and to start the 2021 season. I would probably say Pat's ahead of them just because of the that type of injury and probably a quicker recovery, but hopefully have all three ready to go by training camp.
Let's go next to Pete Sweeney. Go ahead, Pete.
Hey, Brett. Hope you're well.
Hey, Pete.
Question about the wide receiver position. First of all, I know Sammy had said he might have interest in returning. I was wondering where the Chiefs' interest is in potentially retaining Watkins. And then generally speaking, your thoughts on the free agency wide receiver class and then the draft wide receiver class.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I've said it, many times before. Love Sammy and love what he does for our offense. There'll be challenges this year. It'll be a lot more challenging to retain him and bring him back this year just because of where we are. And, we were able to work with him and his agent last year and make it work. This year it'd probably be even more difficult just because we'll have some work to do to get into the cap. And once we do, we'll have to, see where the markets go. It is interesting, Pete, as you mentioned, it's a pretty deep class in regards to free agency and that receiver position. And typically, like most years, there are numbers from top down in the receiver position in the draft. So, I think we're certainly blessed to have, Tyreek Hill and expecting big things out of McCole Hardman this year. And I think we're all excited about the development of Myron Pringle. So we feel really good about those three players. And I think in free agency, we'll be smart. And if something makes sense for us, we'll do what we do every year and listen. I can't see us running out of the gates the first week in free agency to sign a receiver. I don't think that's where we're at. But if the market falls and things make sense for us, I think we'll be smart and selective. And then, if something doesn't work out in free agency, I think there's depth in that position to address it potentially in the draft.
Let's go next to Seren Petro. Go ahead, Seren.
Brett, a lot of conversation last year about how you were able to massage the cap, and I know a lot of the work for this year is kind of done in those contracts you did last year, right? And being able to position yourself. I'm just curious, how would you describe your cap situation this year? And Brad, I'll have a follow-up, please.
Well, I would say it's challenging, but it's like that for most teams. I think when you budget in years in advance, when you're doing things, in real time and you're looking toward the future, you're always projecting, the progression of the cap. And so I think originally, the last couple of years prior to last offseason, we were banking on a cap in 210. And, you feel good about, all right, we're going to be in really good position. And then all of a sudden, we went through last year and now you're at 180. So it's certainly not ideal, but I would say that there's probably half the league is in the same boat, same position. So I think there'll be some unusual, cuts made in the next few weeks just because teams have to get creative and find solutions to get under the cap. I think that our cap team, Brant Phillips, they did a great job of kind of navigating us through these rocky waters last offseason and the contract that we did with Travis and Chris and Pat and the roster bonus structure and our ability to convert them. I think we feel like we're in a good position to get underneath the cap. And then we'll address free agency, and we'll have to potentially make other moves to bring certain players in if we get to that point. Now, again, I don't know how it's going to work and what these markets will be. Will we see business as usual? Probably unlikely. Maybe for some players at certain positions. I do think you'll see that second wave maybe get a little it may get a little interesting because I think typically, in an off season, you'll have your waves of the top guys doing their deals, and then the second wave guys maybe the next week doing their deals. I expect that the first week will be similar, but I think it'll be interesting with the second week, and you'll see some teams not being able to do those mid-level deals or lower-level deals, and I think then the market will be looking for different players at different positions. So, to your question, it's not where we want to be, but that's the reality of what we went through last year in the pandemic. Look forward to seeing how great we can get this year, but there's always different solutions, and I'm confident in my staff, our ability to create room when necessary to add players that will make a difference. Deal.
And then to follow up, is there a different philosophy, a different approach, a different mindset? Maybe is the right word right now. There's one thing when you're building a team that hasn't been to the Super Bowl in 50 years. Another thing when you've got that equity right, in your pocket, maybe, for lack of a better term, equity with your fans, now back-to-back Super Bowls. Do you shift gears and maybe play, the long game? Last year was about right now. The last couple of years have been about right now, and now maybe there's a more long-term view that you take?
Yeah, no, I certainly think that, you feel good about, and I've said this before, you have the head coach and you have the quarterback, and now it's a matter of, I think to your point, when you're so close and maybe entering that, I guess, 19 season when, hadn't won a Super Bowl in 50 years, and then we have a terrific season and we fell short, and that mindset is, you're going all in because you know how hard it is to do it and to get there. And then you get there and then you win it, and then you're able to retain most of those players and get back there again. I think if you live by that mantra, that sooner or later it's going to, like you said, just blow up. So I think being more strategic and just being smart in our decisions, like I said, I don't think, we're going to go out there and try to reinvent the wheel, and we're going to be smart and build for the long haul. And that certainly addresses the offensive defensive line. And again, it goes back to football 101, and that's what we'll do. We'll invest in the offense and defensive lines, and, we'll fill in the skill as we go along. So, I mean, I do think that, once you get the things that that you have to have in place, then I think you can be more patient and let the market and free agency come to you and let the draft come to you and kind of operate in that approach.
We'll take three more going right down the line, starting with Matt Derrick. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, Brett, always appreciate the time. You guys have always been able to mine, the non-Power 5 conferences and lower division talent for, whether it's in the drafts or in free agency after the draft. How are you approaching it this year when you don't have as much film on maybe some of those guys? And how are you, even with the Power 5 guys, balancing that with, what you saw in their earlier years and going to that film?
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the challenge this year. A lot of these small school guys, they really benefit from not so much the Senior Bowl. And look, the Senior Bowl does a great job of bringing those highly celebrated lower school guys. And you saw this year with the Wisconsin Whitewater center and the North Dakota State tackle. I mean, the Northern Iowa tackle. I mean, usually these marquee small school players that the league knows about, they're all there. And that's a great game for them. And it helps kind of guide where these players are in regards to their draft stock. But some of these all-star games that you really missed, the East-West game, that's where Turk Wharton popped on the screen for us last year, the NFLPA game, and some of the other games that, these guys pop up off the screen and they make you go back and look at their tape. And then you're kind of anxious for their pro days to come in to see what they run and jump. That will be the challenge. So, that's where you have to have depth in your scouting department. And, got a lot of experienced guys out there, guys that have been doing this for 15, 20 years. And whether that be Pat Sperduto or, Willie Davis, Terry Delt, Trey Cozy on the West Coast. I mean, these guys, that's what they do. And that's why they're great at what they do. They spend a lot of time on the road, and, they're usually ahead of the game before these guys even get to all-star games. So it's just going to require just more work and just more deliberation with our area scouts and reviewing these guys. And it'll be tough. We can't bring these guys out here to medical. And I do think you're going to see, my guess would be that, and every year you have a ton of undrafted free agents make the team. But I suspect this will be a season where you'll see not only undrafted free agents make teams, but actually have some big impacts right away, just because a lot of these guys, because of the lack of additional exposure that they would have had in the past, they won't have that this year. So, I think it'll be, it'll be our goal and our objective to make sure that, we're one of those teams that identifies and lands one of those guys like we did last year in Turk Wharton.
Go next to Sam Mellinger. Good, Sam.
Hey, Brett. Good to see you. But before I ask the question I was going to ask, can I just have you clarify something? With Eric Fisher, you said that you were expecting him back by training camp. Are you saying that there's a chance he could play, first game of the regular season?
Yeah, I think look at my notes right here. Achilles surgery, 129. Based on Rick and his medical staff, he projects a mid-August return. So now listen, how that works, everything is different and everyone recovers differently. So, I think with that injury and with the time leading up for the season, Rick has here a mid-August return. And you know how that works. That's always, to be determined until the player actually reports back to camp and goes through the offseason and see where he is. But I think that, the mid-August timeline was put in front of my notes here. So, I'll defer to Rick on that and trust his medical expertise.
I hear you. Okay. And the other thing you mentioned, offensive line is being a good position in the draft. And I think it sounded like you were saying first round there. What are some positions you see some depth and maybe some value day 2, day 3?
I think, we just finished our what would have been our pre-combine meetings this past weekend, and getting through the board. Every year you're going to have numbers at receivers just because every team seems to have 2 or 3 of those guys. So there's certainly some depth at the wide receiver position. I would say the 2 positions though that really jump out at you would be the offensive line and the cornerback position. I think those are the 2 positions that kind of just, when you look at the board, they kind of just scream at you that there's depth there, really rounds 1 through 3, 1 through 4. Now they'll go quick. So even though there's numbers there, by the time you blink your eyes and you get into the middle or late round 2, all those numbers that you saw, we joke about it every year. Like, wow, there's so many linemen, but when you pick 31, 32 every year, by the time you get to 231, they're all gone. I mean, that's just the way it works. But just from a sheer number standpoint, I think the offensive line is really deep. I think the cornerback position is deep. And I think the receiver position, has some value in the middle and late rounds. Quarterback looks to be a pretty good class, but I can't anticipate in drafting a quarterback. So certainly early anyway. But yeah, to your question, O-line, corner, and receivers, I think look pretty good. Everywhere else is a little bit thinner. Some positions maybe more thin than in years past, so there'll be a little bit more work to do to see if you can build up the numbers and identify talent later on in the draft.
We'll go last to Nate Taylor. Go ahead, Nate.
Hey, Brett, good to see you as always. I have 2 questions for you. The first to start is, from a defensive philosophy, how do you anticipate this offseason in terms of trying to build out on the defense? You mentioned defensive line earlier, but just do you feel like there's room to do it both in free agency and through the draft in terms of getting the defense slightly better?
Yeah, I don't, free agency, again, will be a unique animal for us. So on one end, we'll work our conversions to get into the cap, and then what we have left and what we can do will be largely dependent on what becomes available to us. And do we think this would be the right course of action? And are there other moves that we would have to make this work? So that'll be one thing. And then on the draft, I think, that will be it kind of works hand in hand. So based upon how the free agency works out, and if you're able to address it, then the draft will work hand in hand. So if you're able to potentially address one area, then it gives you more flexibility to add in another area. Now, if you can't do anything in the draft or in free agency, then you'll certainly have a lot of holes to fill in the draft. But just again, from 1,000-foot view, when you look at our roster composition, I think we certainly want to build back our offensive line, and then on the defensive side, like our secondary, and if I think depth at the linebacker position and defensive line will be something that we'll try to address either through free agency or the draft. So, if you're asking me, just now, again, this can go in many different directions, but just in general, looking forward in the blueprint for the offseason, I mean, we're certainly going to look on the offensive line, the defensive line, and the linebacker position to get better. And but that's not to say you can't get better at every position. Getting Travis a backup tight end, getting depth at wideout, identifying more young corners that we've been able to do, and certainly look to continue to do in the draft will be something that will be always on our radar. And you may find value that you didn't expect. I mean, you may find, you may be thinking one thing and then all of a sudden another position that you didn't anticipate having access to becomes available, and you just have to have different game plans in place.
Yeah, and then secondly, Brett, I'm sure you saw these comments, but DeMar Smith about a week ago gave the impression to agents that because of a truncated cap, that maybe more than in previous years, agents should in essence collude to not obviously get the best deals for their players. I'm just wondering, from a team that already has its constraints with the salary cap and where it may go between now and the start of free agency, how do you navigate that when understanding that guys want to get the best deals for their players in terms of agents, but also you have to somehow structure it to work within the confines of the league in terms of maybe agents colluding more than usual?
Yeah, I mean, listen, that's difficult. And I think that, the only thing that we can do or have the power to do is offer our position or contract and explain it and work with the agents in regards to what's possible. And there comes a point where certain things, because of the stress of the limited cap puts on the agent, the player, the organization. I think what we do is we exhaust every scenario and every possible way things can get executed. And if it happens to jive with the player and their agent, if it makes sense to them, then it works. But there are limitations on what you can do. But I think our job is to just get creative as possible for players that we really want, and work with them and try to find a middle ground. And there's no easy answer to that question, because it is, every agent is different, every player is different, every scenario is different. I like to think, though, that once you can find a happy medium and find a middle ground, that Kansas City and playing in front of this great fan base and playing with Pat Mahomes and playing for Andy Reid is certainly appealing. So I feel like half the battle is already won with what we have to offer in regards to playing here and having opportunity to play for Super Bowls and compete for titles. So the other part, I'll defer and rely on Brant and Chris and getting creative and working for solutions to get these guys paid, maybe in unconventional ways, but they've done a great job of figuring out how to get that done.
That'll do it for today. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC production staff of Derek Donovan, Beth Welsh, Monty Davis, Jeff Rosen, Chris Fickett, and Savannah Smith. A tip of the cap to Herbie, Teope, and Sam McDowell for stopping by and talking Chiefs. Links to their stories can be found in the show notes and on kansascity.com. Hey, we have another deal for you. For a limited time, you can subscribe to Sports Pass for 99 cents a month. That's right, 99 pennies a month to get the Stars sports page online. After 3 months, it auto-renews at $5.99 a month unless you cancel. And what a time to subscribe. The Royals are at spring training. March Madness is right around the corner. And, of course, it is never not Chiefs season. So how do you get it? You go to kansascity.com/sportspass2020. That is kansascity.com/sportspass2020. You want more than just sports coverage? Check out the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports news, features, commentary, and analysis, the whole thing. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, plus additional national news, sports, and business coverage with the e-edition. The details for all of these deals can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. And if you're having trouble hunting down any of these offers, you send me an email, bkirkhoff@kcstar.com. I'll get you to the right place. So whether it's the Sports Pass or the full subscription, you're getting and supporting the best sports and news coverage in Kansas City and helping us produce programs like SportsBeat KC. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back on Wednesday with another episode.